Is it really the common good if it's at the expense of your free will? Welcome to the depths. Hello, welcome or welcome back to Reading from the Depths. My name is Lecton. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today I have a review for you of The Way of Unity by Sarah Balstrup, and I did receive a complimentary copy from the author in exchange for an honest review. Now, this is a piece of literary fantasy that does not offer any easy answers. It pits faith against statecraft in the all-too-human struggle for power and for control. There's a lot about this book that I loved, especially the ideas that it brings up, the really morally gray, sticky, messy conundrums that it brings up between faith and belief and power and control and politics and moral character, essentially. And so I really enjoyed this book. That being said, it is a piece of literary fantasy, for whatever that's worth, more on the quote-unquote literary fiction side of fantasy. And what that means, at least in this context, for me, is that it doesn't have a narrative propulsion all the time, that it's more of an observational exploration of narrative instead of, there's no quest. Like, the characters aren't going on a jaunty little quest in this fantasy story. And so for me, when I was reading it, when I read a piece of literary fantasy or literary fiction in general, I have to be in the right space for it, right? And in order for me to get the most out of it, I have to be able to commit myself to engaging in that art in a meaningful way. And so for me, this story didn't always hit all the time. And that I don't think is at fault of the story or the writing. I think the writing itself and the stylization of the writing is really effective and really well done. But I had so much going on as I read the story that I had a hard time really locking in because it was written in this more kind of ethereal manner. So right at the top of this review, I want to make it clear that I had a really good time with the story. I really enjoyed it. And I think literary fantasy is important. And I think this is a well-executed piece of literary fantasy. I think the questions and the ideas that it proposes and the means of engaging with art that it offers you is a really wonderful journey to take as a reader. Even though my review may seem like it's critiquing a little bit here and there, that's not about the writing so much as it is about my experience of the writing at this particular time in reading it. So as a reader, you'll know what kind of storytelling techniques are, ones that you enjoy the most, and whether or not that's dependent on when you're reading a story or when you're engaging in art or what else is going on in your life. So I want to kind of give a robust picture of this novel and give it all the credit that it's due. Even if it sounds like I am critiquing it, I want to start up front by saying I think this is a wonderful novel, and I'm really glad I had a chance to read it. Okay, so that's my kind of caveat up top, because I read over my written review before sitting down to record this, and I don't want to feel like I'm just kind of critiquing this over and over and over again. So I wanted to kind of put that up top, that I did enjoy this novel, and I think a lot of people will enjoy this novel. And I think, literary fantasy is important, and other upmarket genre, quote unquote, fiction is really important. I think this dividing line between literary fiction and genre fiction is this false bifurcation that isn't useful, and stories like this just go to show that you can take different storytelling modalities and mix them with the fantastical and get something really useful and engaging and meaningful as a result. Okay, with all of my hemming and hawing out of the way, what is the story about? I'm probably going to have to give a little more plot than I usually do, just because the ideas of the story are what are so attractive to me and what really drew me in. And so to give context to that, I have to kind of give a little more plot. But the story takes place in the land of Velspar, which is, I suppose you could think of it as a country or a continent with 7 states within it. And within this country, you have the secular ruling elite, which are called the Scalants, and you have the religious ruling elite, who are called the Intercessors. And hypothetically, they're both, side by side, ruling and taking care of the populace. Now, the word Scalan, that comes from the very first prophet, who was kind of the founder of the religious order and the secular power order. His name was Scalan, so that's how they take their name. So each of these 7 lands, or these 7 states, if you want to call them that, they have 2 Scalans, and that is inherited role. Right? So the eldest child is the one that inherits the statehood, and their partner, it's described in very kind of heteronormative terms. So whether they are male or female, their partner then becomes a second Scalan. So there's always a pair of Scalans who rule each of these 7 states. And then you have the Intercessors, which are like these psychic priests. And now I should say that everyone in this world has like this low level of psychic ability. And sometimes it may just be like the ability to have some kind of emotional connection that is, a non-tangible emotional connection. But the Intercessors especially are born with a more natural psychic talent, which they then train to become these kind of psychic priests. And a big part of the priesthood and the role of these Intercessors is that they know what you're thinking, and they search for people who have red thoughts, right? So whatever the definition of a red thought is quite ambiguous, and it's left ambiguous, I think, on purpose. And they can actually enter into your mind and enter into other people's minds to remove those red thoughts. And part of how they keep control, which is for the common good, is to get rid of everyone that has red thoughts. And now notice what I said there. There are some intercessors who believe that, you can go into someone's mind and remove the red thought, and that is the best way to go about things. But there are others who believe that it's easier just to execute the person that has that red thought, especially because their belief in rebirth is somewhat complicated. And so it's easier just to execute people than it is to do the work of actually removing their red thoughts. And so as a result, there are some intercessors who are focused on, trying to reform, but there are others who are just executioners, essentially. And because of this, there is a constant tension between the secular power and the religious power. And our story starts with one young girl named Sibylla, and she is the younger daughter. So she is not in line to become the Scalan, right? Her parents are the Scalans. She's not in line to be Scalan, though she does have some latent psychic powers, and they scare her, they frighten her. So she constantly is wearing her meridian, which is this headpiece that essentially it's like a Faraday cage, essentially. So no one can look in and she can't look out. It dulls all of her psychic senses. And her father is interested in kind of leading a coup against the intercessors because he thinks they have too much power. And he thinks that the secular authorities don't have enough power. So he is trying to rally the other Scalans to his side to lead a coup against the intercessors. But the intercessors find this out and they murder his whole family in a fire. And I'm not giving anything away. This is kind of given away in the jacket copy, in the description of the story. So her whole family is murdered, but she happens to survive. And all of a sudden, she's put in this role of secular leadership that she has no training for. And her heart is kind of broken with fear and trauma, and now this quest for revenge. And so she works with the Guard. And so the Guard are like the security, right? Hypothetically, the Guard serve Velspar. They serve the whole continent, but they really seem to serve more their individual localities, the 7 lands within Velspar. And their role is somewhat ambiguous. And I think that is also on purpose because they themselves are seeking out power in ways. So you actually have the religious authority and you have the secular authority and you have the military authority who are all kind of vying for power in their own ways. But as a result of this fire, which, kills her whole family, Sibylla launches a campaign against the intercessors, and she gets the other Scalans to her side, and they essentially wipe out the entire religious faith. And by wipe it out, I mean murder all of them, right? Execute all of them. So it's a bloody rampage that brings her to power. So her throne itself, it sits in a pool of blood in this way. But in her mind, this is what's best for the world. And there are still some intercessors who survived. So there are a few that are like hiding in the woods, essentially. And obviously, they have the intention to bring back their faith and to return things to normalcy. And she herself is on this quest because she knows, A, that there are still some intercessors that survived, and B, not everything is as easy as she thought it would be. She is trying to fulfill her father's mission of getting rid of this religious hypocrisy and power, but then what's left in the wake of it, the vacuum there, all of a sudden she has to rule in a way that she isn't prepared for. She is wildly unequipped for ruling. And so in her attempts to, take care of everyone and work for the common good, she has to then force her will on others and make them do things in order for their own good, essentially, this real parochial idea. And so at the heart of this story is this tension between the sacred and the profane, between the religious authority and the secular authority. And what I really love about the story is that there isn't one morally right side. Okay. Every time a character is starting to win you over, as soon as they do something that you say, yes, right, exactly, then they do something horrendous, right, on top of that. And it all is in line. Like you see all of the steps of their plan and why they come to the decisions they come to. And you also see how awful they are. So there isn't like, oh, yes, the religions are all abusive and they're awful. Or no, the seculars are abusing their power. No, it is both of them are in their minds. They're doing what is best to take care of the country, right? To do what's right by legacy, by tradition, and to do what is for the common good. Yet both of those systems, the secular and the religious, are twisted by their own desire for power, their own desire for control, their own kind of insecurities as well. And this struggle is the heart of this story. And it's really compelling, right? It's really, really exciting to see on the page because you explore these different characters. There are 3 main points of view. The whole first half of the book, give or take, is from the point of view of this character, Sibylla. And then you have 2 other characters, Ambrose and Zohar, brother and sister, who are they are in line to be Scalan, or Zohar is in line to be Scalan, and Ambrose is her younger brother of a different part of the country, of one of the lower of the island community down in the south of the country. And their political views and their religious views are different than Sibylla's, let's say. And so you have these 3 points of view. And what you get is, by exploring these 3 different characters, you see this tension and this struggle between faith and the secular, between statehood and religious power. you see that struggle play out in each of their individual lives, and you see how it tears them up and how they are torn between different ideas of what is right, of what is proper, of what is their role in the world and in their community and to themselves. How to do what is best for everyone. And does that mean, forging a new tradition going forward? Does that mean making compromises? Or does that mean taking things back to the way they were, right? So there's this constant struggle, and you see that struggle as it plays out in the lives of these characters. So I really enjoyed that. Now, throughout the story, the way each chapter is framed is in relationship to this great fire, this event that killed the whole family, Sibylla's whole family. And so you can see that this is like the central pivot around which the whole story turns, right? It starts 1 year before the fire, and then it's the year of the fire. And then every chapter, it'll say 1 year after the fire, 2 years after the fire, 5 years after the fire. So everything is framed around this event. So as a result, this event becomes the defining event for our experience of this narrative. And so for me, that struggle that you see played out across the characters and across the populace is the heart of this book, and it is what makes it so compelling. They're all different ideas about faith, all within the religious communities. They consume this kind of psychoactive plant or a stimulant that sometimes they smoke it, sometimes they make it into wine. It's used as part of religious ceremonies, but it's also used for pleasure. And so there's the intermixing of kind of how to open up your mind and to center yourself and to develop your mind to such an extent that you can make these latent psychic powers become manifest and then use them for the common good. But is your opinion of the common good the same thing as the common good, right? So these ideas of faith and of rebirth, and they have these two religious godheads, a mother and a father. The mother is like a sea serpent, and the father is like a carrion bird, essentially, who they worship and who they are devoted to. And so you have this whole religious mythology that is really compelling and really exciting. And then that butts up against the idea that all that religion has done is be a real opiate of the people, right? It is really taking away people's free will. In case I didn't make it clear, these intercessors, before they were kind of, done away with, they didn't persecute people for engaging in harmful actions. They persecuted people for having the thought to engage in harmful actions, which is actually a very common sci-fi trope, right? The idea of pre-crime and the idea of, persecuting and stopping crime before it starts, right? And so you can see why there are people that are against this. And the only way to, have common good is to get rid of free will. And if the intercessor says that I know you had these negative thoughts, therefore I'm going to do something about it, there's nothing you can do about it, right? You're stuck. So there's a constant tension there. Now let's talk about the literary aspects of this, right? I think that the writing style, as well as the plotting, as well as the world building, are all very, let's say, they're ethereal, okay? And so the world building, you have a picture of the whole world, and you have the outline of this world, but you don't have all the details filled in. You're only given details as they're needed throughout the course of the story. So following these three characters, these are all the characters you follow are like elites, right? They're the wealthy elites who are the ruling class. And you get to know about them, and you get to know about their servants, and you get to know a little bit about these religious zealots that you meet, but you don't know anything about the working class. You don't know anything about the people that actually live in this world, right? You don't know anything about the professions or the customs or the habits or the other social rituals or any of these things. So you're given a broad outline of this world, and it's quite expansive, right? You're giving little hints of things here and there, but you aren't given all the details. And then as a reader, you're either allowed to fill those in on your own, or you have to fill those in on your own. And the enjoyment you get out of a story like this is in many ways dependent on how you interpret that. The difference between getting the opportunity to fill in all the details on your own or having to fill in all the details on your own. Do you know what I mean? And so the writing is like that in general. The plotting itself is also quite expansive and quite ethereal. So the story takes place over decades of time, everything focused on the locus of this fire. But then as we move through time, everything is almost very observational, right? You're a step back from everything. So you do get inside the minds of these three characters as you switch perspectives, and you do understand their feelings and where they're coming from, kind of what their decision-making process is, what traumas and fears and inciting incidents they've experienced in their life to lead them on the path that they're going on. So you do get some measure of interiority, but it's always at a step removed, right? You never really feel along with them. You just have the chance to observe them. And so there isn't a strong narrative thrust because none of the characters, in the beginning, Sibylla has this main narrative thrust is to basically get rid of the intercessors. And that happens off page, essentially, right? You're just told that it happens because instead of showing you the action, They're showing you the consequences of the action. And so a lot of the story is like that. Now, there are some points where the characters are making active decisions. The characters aren't passive. They're making decisions. They're making plans. They're trying to execute their plans. They're trying to be sneaky sometimes. And you see that, and you do kind of participate in that a little bit. But it's much more observational. You're much more along for the ride. And to some extent, the characters themselves are along for the ride. So the plotting is quite slow-paced because it doesn't have this momentum pushing you forward. Instead, you are a step back and you're removed. And even the description and understanding of the characters is also a step back, like I said. You understand the interiority of these three characters, and there are also a few other of the intercessors who you get some chapters from their points of view, but those are few and far between. It's mostly these three characters. You do understand their interiority, but it isn't, their interiority is not the primary focus. What their interiority does is give you, as a reader, an opportunity to see the struggles that the author is putting on the page and have a chance to wrestle with those yourself, right? That feels, at least to me, that's more the point. So the plotting and the world building are both expansive, but also a little bit ethereal. And the writing itself, the writing feels the same way. The style of the writing, it feels like a melody that is blowing on the wind, that you can just barely hear it. And depending on where you're standing, maybe you catch a little piece of it here and there. And it's just teasing you. But it's not really sinking into your memory, right? The writing, it floats on top of the narrative, if that makes sense. It's not dense. It's not lyrical. It isn't really descriptive. It is, it's riding above the rest of the story. And I appreciate that. I think that having this kind of wispy, almost writing style, sometimes it feels like it's at odds with the pacing of the story, because the pacing, like I said, is so slow and observational, where the writing feels like it's floating above everything. And I like that tension that it creates because it parallels the emotional tension and the feeling of introspection and uncertainty that all of our characters have, right? This world is in a time of uncertainty. Everyone is uncertain, no matter what side of the line you fall on, right? No matter who you think deserves to be in power, no matter what you think is the right way to go for the common good, nothing is certain. And those people that feel like they have the strongest grasp on certainty are the ones that are probably furthest away from it. You know what I mean? And so I appreciate the writing style. I think that sometimes it feels like it's at odds with the narrative structure, and I like that. I think that it really is an effective stylistic decision to really force a type of introspection on the part of the reader. So I'm not sure how much more I have to say. I really, really enjoy the ideas in this story. It is playing, obviously, with these ideas of power and the idea of trauma, the idea of revenge, the idea of trying to balance the common good and free will, and whether a parochial society where you're stripped of your free will, but it's for your own benefit, is that really what is known as the common good or not? There's this constant tension between the sacred and the profane. And, the author, Sarah Balstrup, her degree is in religion, and my undergraduate degree is in religion as well. And so I know we've read a lot of the same authors, whether it be Eliade or Assad, or responses by, J.Z. Smith, or even Bruce Lincoln and so forth, contemporary religious scholars who are looking at the importance of myth and the importance of mythology and understanding yourself as a person and understanding your reality through the lens of myth, and then understanding the tension between the sacred and the profane, between ritual and between social activity, and how sometimes they are at odds and sometimes they're co-constructive of one another. And so I think those ideas are something that she plays with beautifully, and you don't have to be a religious studies scholar to appreciate them. I think what she does is what is driven home in the experience of this piece of art is that we live with these constant tensions in our own life. So this balance, this struggle, right, between the worldly and the sacred is something that we live with in our own minds. And then that is mapped out onto society, and that is mapped out onto the world, writ large. So I think that is a really beautiful exploration. And then hand in hand with that is the idea of the personal versus the political. And are you ever able to divide those two? You're constantly struggling. Is there a distinction where your personal actions are affecting others? So therefore, do your personal actions inherently become political? And then looking at it from a more spiritual point of view, or a more kind of holistic point of view, you have this exploration of trauma, this exploration of revenge, this idea of reconciliation. Is that possible? Is it ever possible to get over the damage that was done to you? Is it ever possible to put aside your own grievance and your own pain for the bettership of others? Is there a benefit to repressing your emotions, as the intercessors seem to suggest, as opposed to actually accepting your emotions? Maybe by stripping yourself of these red thoughts, quote unquote, you lose the ability to learn how to actually navigate them. So instead of learning how to be a good person, you have that opportunity taken from you. Or maybe having those red thoughts taken from you, repressing those emotions in some way, is the more useful way to go, right? The intercessors have been following these prophecies for millennia, or I think for centuries at least. I'm not quite sure the timetable, but in any case, this distinction, right, about how you navigate difficult emotions and what does it mean to be a part of a community, and whether your, difficult thoughts, whether they be lecherous or angry or violent or desirous thoughts, if they set you apart from community, or if you are just one member of community struggling with the same difficulties, right? So all these things I think she explores in ways that are really exciting, and that is something you can do in genre fiction in general, but especially when she's taking this literary approach by having such a hands-off approach to the plot and to the narrative, and even having this expansive exploration of character. She allows you to then explore all these themes and these ideas through the lens of character and through the lens of this world, which I think is effective. Now, for me personally, I had so much going on when I read this that I would have liked one of those things, whether it be the writing to be either denser or more lyrical or more descriptive, to have more exposition, or to have the characters to be more intimate, to have a feeling where I actually understand them from the inside out and I'm feeling things with them as opposed to observing them, or to have the world building to be more robust and not just a sketch, but to have all the details filled in, or for there to be some sort of narrative propulsion that is really pushing me along, whether I want to go along or not. Any one of those things would have added, for me personally, to the experience of the story. But since all of them were a step back, then, I really had to rally all of my attention to really be with this story. And so if you're able to do that, there is a lot to benefit from this story. If you're able to give it your attention and to give it the attention it deserves, because it is exploring these really interesting things, then there's a lot of joy and kind of meaningful growth that anyone can have with this story. So I'm so grateful I had the chance to read it. I wouldn't have found it otherwise. It's independently published. You can get it anywhere, you get your books, but it wouldn't have come across my radar if the author hadn't reached out to me. So I'm really glad that she did. There was a follow-up to this book that she's already published, and it follows the events of this book immediately. But I just saw an interview with the author and Dr. Philip Chase on his YouTube channel. I'll actually link to that below, though they discuss a lot of spoilers for the book. So if you do watch their interview, be aware that you're going to get the whole book spoiled for you. But in that interview, she mentions that there is a third book as well to kind of complete a trilogy, but also a prequel book. And so there are going to be 4 books in this series. And she's hoping the first book is standalone. The way it ends is very satisfying. It's not a clear-cut answer, right? It doesn't say here is an answer. We've solved everything. It's not like that. The whole story is about being sticky and muddy and messy and difficult and morally gray and forcing you to make choices that are the best options you have given the circumstances, but it doesn't mean they're ideal. So the story ends in a similar way that's very satisfying in terms of the narrative arc of these characters, but it's not like all wrapped up neat in a bow. So it does stand alone if you just want to read this first one. But there is a second one that when I have a little more free time and I'm not so busy, I'm hoping to read. And then the third one, I believe, is also going to be a standalone, even though it's going to follow the course of these. And then there'll be a prequel. As I mentioned, the secular rulers are called Scalans, and that comes from the name of the first prophet. So I think the prequel is going to be about him and the founding of this faith tradition. So there's a lot to explore, and I really enjoyed it. Like I said, you have to be prepared that it is slow-paced, and you're going to take your time with it. It's going to take its time with you. And that kind of writing is very deliberate, and I think that she does it really, really well in this, and you just have to be in the right headspace for it. I think that's all I have to say without giving away kind of important spoilers for the story. I'll just be repeating myself if I keep going. So thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this, about literary fiction in general, and the crossover between literary fiction and genre fiction, and just your ideas of exploring the sacred and the profane in writing and in art. I think is so powerful in genre and pulpy and fantastical art to use that as a lens through which to observe our own lives. And by observing our own lives, we understand how we engage with something that is bigger than ourselves, something outside of ourselves. I think this story is really successful at giving you that opportunity. I'd love to hear your thoughts about that, and if you have other recommendations of stories that do similar things. For now, I'll say thank you for spending some time with me. I appreciate you. Please be kind to yourselves, take care of each other, and go slowly.